A final part of this interaction system is going to be automating these line traces, so that I currently have to push a button each time I want to open or close a door or interact with any other object that I set up to be interactable. What we really want is for that system to be running passively in the background, and then when the player runs up to an object that they can interact with, the interaction text will appear and they will be prompted to push a button in order to interact with that. So heading over to the third person character, I'm going to, instead of using this line trace by channel code whenever the player pushes a button, we're going to bind it to a custom event instead. So save your key press, we'll change that to being the player choosing to interact with an option rather than creating the line trace here, and we're going to create our own new custom event. This custom event is going to be called draw line trace, and connect that up. Custom events can be called by you whenever you'd like, but they're not called automatically, unlike many of these other built-in functions, such as the overlap events. So we're going to construct a system which will automatically call this draw line trace event every, let's go with quarter of a second here. So I'm going to right-click and create another custom event, and this is going to be called auto line trace. And auto line trace is simply going to call the delay node where it is going to wait for 0.25 seconds, and when it's complete it will call the draw line trace, that's the custom event we just created down here, and when that's done it will call itself in order to restart. So auto line trace. This automatic system just now needs to be called when we start beginning play. So there is this default text built into the third-person character to set up your controls. When the setup for the controls is done, we're just going to call auto line trace to begin that line trace system happening automatically. We can test that now by going into play, and as you can see, every quarter of a second a line trace is being drawn out from the camera into the world in front of the player. However, it's automatically interacting with every object that it touches. So whilst the text is now behaving correctly, it appears when we look at something which we can interact with and disappears when we look at something we can't interact with. We don't wish for that system to automatically also interact with those items. We need to set it up so that it will merely prompt the player and they get to choose whether to interact or not. So that's why we saved this keyboard input from earlier. This is why it's currently automatically calling the interact function. That's how we've set it up previously when it was just a single keyboard input. But rather than calling this interact function here every single time the line trace hits it, we are going to instead store a reference to this actor, and when the player presses F to interact with that actor, we will use that reference to call the try interact function rather than doing it automatically. So I'm just going to break these nodes here and move that up to the top. And we're going to create a new variable which is going to store the output information from this out hit actor. You can do that either by creating the variable manually, or you can just right click on the out hit actor and promote it to a variable, which will create this node saving the information for you. I'm going to rename that out hit actor, as not as useful as interaction target. So up here, if it does implement the interface, we're going to show the text saying we can interact with it, and I'm going to set the interaction target to be whatever object it is we're currently looking at. I'm going to duplicate that node and plug it into the false line here. So if it doesn't implement the interaction interface, we're going to hide the text, and I'm going to set the interaction target to nothing. I'm not plugging anything else in here. So this will wipe itself automatically depending on what you're looking at, and will set it to new targets. Now it's as simple as setting up the player's input here. They will press F, get a reference to the interaction target, try to interact with it. Let's give that a whirl. When I walk up to the door, my try interact text appears. If I look away, the interaction text disappears. And when I push my interact button, I can open the door whenever I choose to, rather than doing it automatically. Open, close. And since the system is now pretty much set up, I'm going to set those line traces. Instead of drawing the debug type, I'm just going to hide it. Now the lines for the debug trace will be invisible, but the system will work, and you have a fully functioning interaction system, all you have to do now is create more objects to interact with and make sure that they implement the interaction interface.